if you have beautiful images, but you don't have the connections, it does feel like screaming into the void because you're like, isn't my work good enough? But guess what? There's so many people with good work. And so a lot of those ins have to do with the people that make those introductions and that build you into the web of what exists in your city or community.
Welcome to the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I'm Angela Nicholson, and I'm the founder of SheClicks, which is a community for female photographers. In these podcasts, I talk to women in the photographic industry to hear about their experiences, what drives them, and how they got to where they are now. In this episode, I'm speaking with Lindsay Adler, an award-winning photographer, director, and educator who specialises in beauty and fashion photography. She's based in New York, but has travelled the world shooting for high-end brands and publications. Lindsay is a Canon USA Explorer of Light, and in 2020, she became the first woman to win Rangefinder magazine's Icon of the Year award. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks so much for joining me today on our podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We actually met very, very briefly at the photography show in 2019. It looked like you were having an absolute blast there, but I know that your talk on the Superstage was packed to the rafters.
It was nice because I actually hadn't done any sort of big conference in the UK in a while. And so I didn't know, shows are coming and going and you never know about the livelihood of them. And it was exciting and packed and I had a great time.
That's really good. Yeah, it's a really fun show. I love going. Now, your introduction to photography is really interesting because I hear from a lot of photographers who were inspired by their dad to get into photography. So it's really refreshing to read that it was actually your mum and your grandmother that got you into photography.
Yeah. So I actually, even though I live in New York City and have a very metropolitan life, I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. To be clear, I didn't really do any of the farm work, so don't let me overstate it. But my mom and my grandma always did photography when I was growing up as a hobby. And they kind of would treat it almost as like scavenger hunts. They would, be wandering around and taking pictures of flowers and mushrooms and animals. And so one of my earliest memories of my mom, my grandma, and I was everyone taking pictures. So it kind of immediately put it in a place of like, oh, this is what the women in our family do. We spend time taking photos together.
Oh, that's really nice. And how did you gravitate then from, flowers and mushrooms to fashion photography and beauty photography?
So I did actually for a while kind of look at it as saying, okay, if I want to do this professionally, which by the way, I decided I wanted to do it professionally at age 12. By 15, I actually formally did my business paperwork. So I officially have had a business since I was 15. Mm-hmm. And, when I was looking at it, I was going, okay, how can I make a living at this? And I love my hometown. I grew up in upstate New York, which, if you're not from the U.S., when you hear upstate New York, you think everything in New York is high rises, but it was actually a 300-acre farm, like really rural area. And I was trying to figure out what could I do if I stayed here to make a living at photography. So I started with high school senior portraits and weddings and engagement sessions and babies and families. And I liked it, and I've always loved photography. But when I went to college, I took a class that was basically on the history of fashion photography. It was an elective, and the teacher I had was really passionate about it. And I remember seeing the photos going, I didn't even really realize that this existed, and now I realize this is what I want to do. Because how at the time I was picturing a lot of portraiture was someone stand there and smile, right? But when I looked at fashion photography, there was storytelling and style and drama and fantasy. And that looked like a lot more fun to me.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's more exciting and dramatic and you're in control of everything, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that also reflects that part of my personality of enjoying being a control freak. And just to be honest on that part.
And why not?
Exactly.
To know what you wanted to do at age 13, that's pretty remarkable. What was it about photography that really sucked you in?
I think it's a couple things. Photography itself was something that at least in my, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was really good at. And so I was receiving a lot of positive reinforcement. And when you're a kid, that means so much to your personal identity. It was one of the first things I tried that I really excelled at. Definitely wasn't good at sports, for example. And I didn't really excel at other art forms. I was okay. But then in photography, I had, all these people, all these adults around me, telling me how good I was and how I should keep going. And so I think it just instantly, I associated it with success and feeling good. But the other part of it was, it also is a little bit of magic, because you can see something and capture it like that. I don't care how long you've been a photographer. I really do think it's magic. And then once I started doing fashion photography, the idea that you can have something in your head completely made up and bring it to life is another form of that. And especially if you don't know how to draw or paint or anything like that, it's bringing something from the ether and making it concrete.
And did you initially shoot film, or did you go straight into digital photography?
I did initially shoot film. So my first couple of weddings were on film. My first couple of high school senior portraits were on film. But I remember, my first digital camera, was 6 megapixels. And it was like the first Canon DSLRs. And it was nice because I was already making a little bit of money from photography. And so I would do, some portraits with film, and I'd sell little photos to calendars and things like that. So it was nice because a lot of my early camera gear, I was able to actually buy myself, which is another huge milestone for a kid. Like, you put your work into it, and so this becomes a symbol that you're holding into your hand. Don't get me wrong. I would definitely get a lens that would be my year-long present from my parents. It would be like birthday present, holiday present. Like, here's the lens you get for the year. So I think that photography just became a really important symbol, and in so many different ways, like spending time with family, positive reinforcement, symbol of hard work, symbol of becoming an adult, finding something that you're good at, all of those things.
I think that not so much the need, but the desire or the appreciation of positive affirmation actually stays with you, doesn't it? Because, it's really important as a kid. It's very formative, but actually it's nice to sort of shore up your confidence and your security to get those messages every now and again, like, yeah, that's great, you're doing really, really well.
Well, this is why people love social media, right? It's constant, likes and comments and whatnot. But I also think, for me, when you get into your late teens, or even early teens, but late teens, and going into your 20s, and a lot about yourself is up in the air, and you don't know who you are, and you're evolving. But when you have something that is a constant, it is really feels like home. And so photography has much more than just an artistic place for me. Like, it has been home for me for more than half my life.
Wow, that's lovely. And were there any times, you started out at 13, you registered your business at 15. When you say got to about 20, was there any point when you suddenly thought, what the heck am I doing? Have I made a mistake? Did you ever doubt yourself, or have you been sort of consistent in knowing that you were doing the right thing?
I am very lucky, because the same people, my mother and my father, for example, they never once asked me to consider doing something else. They told me from an early age that whatever I chose, as long as I poured my heart into it, I would be successful. So even when there were, everybody struggles at any point in their career, honestly. But anytime that there was a struggle, it was just a bump in the road, and I would keep working and get to the next, to the next level of it. So if I'm honest, there was never a point where I considered doing something else. The only challenges have ever been if I hadn't diversified enough and one income stream dried up. So for example, if I only did high school seniors, and that was in the summer, and then the rest of the year going, okay, I need money, and I didn't promote my business enough and for weddings or portraits. So that was one of the things that I learned really early on by having a business, is that you want to have a style, you want to have a specialty, but you do need to have enough diversity to be able to pivot when necessary.
Yeah, it's always good to have a range of clients. And speaking of clients, actually, how did you find your first clients? Did they come to you, or did you go out and market quite heavily?
So my very first clients were other high school students' parents. So my very first business was high school senior portraiture. And so, I had okay photos, but to be honest, we all know that a lot of clients don't know the difference between okay and very good. They just know when something's better than what they could do. And so, of course, I was inexpensive And I was friends or knew these students. And so I had actually went and I printed out little promos and I gave it to the juniors. So, the kids going into the summer to get their senior portraits, I gave them promo cards. And then some of them called me. And then from there, then I did advertising in the local newspaper. And then eventually, after college, I did have a storefront in my hometown. But before that, I was shooting out of my parents' living room. And, when you're a kid, I didn't think twice about it. Nobody seemed to complain. And it was my opportunity to build my skill set. And if it didn't bother them, it didn't bother me.
Great attitude, I think. And how did that progress into a fashion photography business?
So after college, I continued my portrait photography business. And I did a lot of high school seniors and a lot of weddings. Like that was really where I was making my income from. And because I had found fashion photography and loved it, I knew that I wanted to move to New York, which was about a 3.5 or 4 hour drive away from where I grew up. And so I started to save my money, and I was like super thrifty, like as much as possible. And I saved enough money in about 2 years to feel like I had enough of a cushion to move to New York and be able to pay rent, even if I didn't have income. But along the way, over those 2 years, anytime that I would see downtime on my calendar, I would take a bus. It was about $35 each way. I would take a bus down to New York, and I connected with people because at the time there was Model Mayhem. And so I would connect with other creatives, and I'd put on a test shoot. So I'd have, a shoot where I did hair and makeup and wardrobe, and we would shoot in Central Park. So it wouldn't cost me any extra money. And so I would, shoot in the summer a lot. And so by the time I was ready to move, I already knew some hair and makeup, some model agencies. I had already had connections with some of them. And in fact, in one of these test shoots, I had pitched to somebody, hey, you guys, if I pay for your bus ticket, would you come to upstate New York? Would you take that 3.5 hour bus ride? Because around me, unlike New York City, I have waterfalls and forests and fields. And so it was just a different environment for people to get to shoot. And so on one of these, a wardrobe stylist came up to stay to shoot for a couple days. And we really bonded. We're still friends. I actually just went to dinner with her a couple weeks ago. And this was solidly like 16 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. But anyway, she liked my work, liked working with me. We bonded. And she is what I would say was my secret to being able to step into the world of, New York City, whether it's fashion photography or commercial work. Because she had been there so long, she was able to start opening doors and making introductions to me. So she introduced me to potential clients. She did a lot of celebrity styling and for professional athletes. And so she'd say to them, by the way, I've met this new young photographer. You can get a great portrait for her for a relatively inexpensive price. And so I would say my entire first year in New York, all of my rent was paid by people she introduced me to. And so sometimes it's just like that one magical person that opens up the doors, which is why networking is so important. It's not about just like going to a party and shaking hands, but it's about making creative connections where they become your creative family. I just did a shoot this weekend. I was doing a workshop, and I really do consider all of them family. And anytime they hear an opportunity, there's a job, there's an editorial, there's a producer, there's something, they instantly tell me. And so it's like I have, 5 people constantly doing research for opportunities for me.
And I think even though now we've got the benefit of social media and you can put posts on Instagram and, if you're really lucky, they can be spread far and wide. Actually, it's still really, really important to make connections with people, form friendships and allegiances.
I still think it's more important because when someone can vouch for you and know an opportunity that is immediate, like that's where the doors open up. Because being on social media it's still relevant. You still want to stay on top of people's mind. I think social media is important. I still regularly post, regularly create content. But it's often when someone was like, oh, I heard that this editor just moved to this magazine. Let's reach out to her. I knew her when she was at this other one. Like it's that sort of networking that creates opportunities. And I actually found, just as a side note for people, in the world of commercial and fashion photography, not portraiture per se, a lot of my commercial work has, like how people have found me, was because they were putting together their inspiration boards or mood boards for the ad agency, for the commercial client. And as they build this, they found my images online. They found them on Pinterest. And so as they're building the inspiration, they go, well, if we have a bunch of her images in the inspiration, why would we not just reach out to her and see if she can bid on the job? So I honestly think a majority of my jobs come from me being on their creative boards.
Please excuse this interruption. This podcast is supported by Canon, a leading technology company founded in Japan in 1937. Canon is dedicated to helping people reimagine and push the boundaries of what is possible through imaging. Canon believes in living and working together for the common good to develop a better society and a more inclusive and equitable world. Let's get back to the episode. Fashion photography has a reputation for being quite cutthroat. Is that your experience, or would you say it's not true?
I like to be positive. However, I've had some less than positive experiences with people. I think this is why I build my little families, my little creative families, like my hair, makeup, wardrobe, because then you can protect each other from that cutthroat world and you have each other's back. And like, my team is fiercely loyal and I am towards them as well. So yes, people, creatives in the world are dramatic and emotional and like to create unnecessary hassle at times. But the other thing I'll note is when I say fashion photography, it's really the world of commercial photography. A majority of what I make my money off of has nothing to do with clothing. Even though I create imagery that falls into that category. For example, my biggest job this year was for an aesthetics company. And so let me preface by saying, so it was for breast implants, a company that does breast implants, but specifically for women that had reconstructive breast surgery after breast cancer. And so they flew me out and I did a 5-day shoot with real talent, women that had actually had this experience. And that has nothing to do with fashion photography, right? Like there's no fashion. It's not about the clothing. But instead, it's more about a client hiring me because when they look at my photos, they feel a certain way. Or the women that they're capturing in their photos, they want them to have the empowering look that you see in my fashion work. Or they look at my work and they'll see my control and finesse over lighting. So it's not, even though I am a fashion photographer, I hardly photograph fashion. Most of my paid work is I'm being hired for an aesthetic or my ability to produce a certain look.
Yes, because even fashion photography, yes, you need to see the clothing, but it's not just about the clothing. There's so much more to it, isn't there? Like you say, it's the aesthetic.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of fashion photographers are men, and they're taking photographs which are mainly consumed by women. Do you think that gives you an advantage?
I actually do. I really do think it's helpful. And if you use the reconstructive breast surgery, I think that they're going to hire a woman for that. And I think in the past, because it was so difficult for women to get established in the commercial photography world, there just weren't many for clients to choose from. They really weren't. And so they might have hired a man in the past just because there weren't many women that were well established that they could reach out to. I know that when I moved to New York, I had learned from my teachers at school. They had said, one of the best ways to get into the industry is to assist for other photographers. And so I've been in New York for, like 13 or 14 years now. I guess it would be 14. And so when I got here, I started going and trying to network with photographers. And there truly were hardly any women in commercial world, which is crazy to me because 15 years ago sounds like a long time and not long at all for this to be an issue. But I had so many male photographers tell me to my face that they do not hire female assistants. They would say, for a variety of reasons, they would say female assistants aren't strong enough to do the work, which I'm weak as hell now, but I used to be strong then. I'm so weak now. But I absolutely would make up for it with my hustle. So I was told they don't hire female assistants for that. I was told by some that their wife doesn't let them hire female assistants, which I was like, this sounds like an unhealthy marriage, but okay. So I had that. I also had ones that said, hey, sometimes when I travel to save budget, I share a room with my assistant and I'm not going to share a room with women. So like I just right away was hitting these roadblocks and it made me realize why you really weren't seeing any women that I could even reach out to in the commercial world. There were so few. So that's why I feel like now that there are starting to be more, or now that I am established, there's certain jobs where either they want the female point of view or the subject matter is just more appropriate to have a female photographer.
And, if they want to share, or if they need to share a room because of budget, then it's more feasible. And yeah, you've mentioned a lot of barriers that I think don't automatically spring to mind, but are nevertheless very, very significant.
For sure. Yeah, I know that this is one of the reasons, and I hire all different people for internships, but I definitely make a concerted effort to have female interns, females that I mentor, because it makes a difference. Like, I know it does. It would have made a difference to me.
Yeah. Thinking of, fashion is constantly evolving from season to season, but with it also, the photography has to evolve. Different aesthetics become popular. Suddenly something that was great last year is really old hat now. How do you stay ahead of that game? Because you're not following a trend. You're one of the people setting it.
Oh, I totally know what you mean. And it actually is a challenge. For example, in the past couple of years, fashion photography and the aesthetics have fallen into two really dramatically different categories. One, I would say, kind of falls into the category of authenticity. So it's more real-looking subjects. It's maybe shot on film. It's more natural light. It's personal expression. And then on the other side of it, the exact opposite is highly polished, really tons of production, the makeup and faces that you would see perhaps on Instagram, right? Like, you see two very different aesthetics. And so you have to figure out how to navigate, which audiences and which clients that you're appealing to, especially when you have a style that maybe exists somewhere in between. And so what I try to do is I'm definitely more on the produced side, but then I also will go out of my way to create shoots that photograph more authentic or quote unquote real people. So the next step, the next challenge of all of this is going to be, where does AI fit into all of this? Because in Europe, for example, there are some rules against for truth in advertising. Some photos having to be, you have to say if they're retouched. And over here, that is not the case. And so many things will be able to be created with AI. And so you'll have to figure out where you exist and what your work is saying, and how you incorporate what was captured in camera versus pulled out of AI. Like, it's something that I'm currently trying to sort out myself.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. It's one of those things that's just suddenly come along, and we're all going, so it can do what?
Yeah.
Just experimenting and trying to work out what it means. At what point in your career did you start to introduce workshops? Because I know education is a really important thing for you.
Sure. So when I was in college, I used to also attend this large conference, which I think it's actually either in its last year or just had its last year. It was called New England Camera Club Conference or Council. And it was this big conference. And it was a lot of older people. I was by far the youngest, for sure, usually by 30 years. Like, no joke. And at the time when I was in college, like, digital photography had really been, like, most people had digital cameras at that point. And we were just learning about Lightroom. And a lot of these people were struggling with managing digital asset management, like how to keep track of your files, backing them up. How do you use Lightroom, Bridge, whatever. And so I actually reached out to them and offered my teaching services, because at the time I was using Lightroom. I mean, I had even used it in beta. And so that was one of my first classes, was teaching people that were just new to digital photography how to keep track and protect their files and back them up. And so I really, really enjoyed that for a variety of reasons. What will, harken back to the beginning of the conversation of getting positive reinforcement. People telling me, like, oh, you're good at this. This was so helpful, right? That was, a really positive feeling. Yeah. But where it has evolved for me as well is I've actually always enjoyed teaching. I was one of those nerds in high school that when they would have, like, be the teacher day, where you could go, like, teach English class or teach history, and you prepare a lesson. Like, I volunteered for that. Again, it's not like an extra credit thing. That was just you enjoy doing it. And I remember when I was applying for different scholarships and things going into college, my parents said, well, you should maybe apply for a teaching scholarship. Like you may be a photography teacher. You love that as well. And so it was always something that existed. It just wasn't sure how it would come to manifest itself. And then as I started to grow in my career, I started attending more professional conferences like Imaging USA and like WPPI. And I saw that there was something that I had to share for my perspective. And then once I became a better photographer, I could actually share something of my technique. So I was teaching before I was a good photographer, but I was teaching things that as a younger person with tech, I had something to share with people. So I now do a whole bunch of workshops, a ton of them. And my goal, the way that I approach them is I want to help people more easily embrace their passion. So that may be that I am cutting out the junk, cutting out the overcomplicated explanations and trying to give people useful information that they can use immediately. And that could be for business, that could be for lighting technique. Because when I was in college, I did have a photography degree, and I actually got a B in my lighting class, at a studio lighting class, and I got a B.
Oh dear.
And I consider myself a lighting expert, and I was a very good student, but it was because the teacher made it more complicated, I think as a gatekeeping thing, wanted to make it seem like it was difficult so that you had to work for it. But it wasn't. It didn't have to be. And if I had a teacher that could explain it in more plain terms and with practical usage, I would have gotten a lot better, a lot faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that attitude that some people do have towards, I'll teach you so much, but I'm not going to explain it fully because I'm the expert and you'll never get to that stage. And I really don't get that sense from you at all. But I love the range of workshops that you offer. And I noticed the other day that you were offering one on dressmaking for photographers. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant because I think you say it's not actually, cut out a pattern and run it all up. But we have a virtual coffee morning in SheClicks, and we often talk about 90% of photography is faffing about. And it's, only 10% is the photography. And, the idea that actually you can create something that looks really stunning and looks like a dress, but actually isn't a dress. You've just created something from a really fantastic piece of fabric. I think that's a really interesting thing. And it's really lovely to know that somebody like you does that and is prepared to teach it as well.
Well, so there's two parts of this. Part number one of it is actually very often, surprisingly, in fashion photography, even if there's wardrobe, there is a bit of it roughly falls into the category of draping, right? You have a subject that doesn't fit something, or there's a vision of how you want there to be this big, cape behind the subject. And so when you work with creatives, you see their brains work and then they make it happen out of a piece of fabric. And so I'd seen this and I asked them to teach me. I in no way have any sort of skill sewing or dressmaking at all, but I have asked my creative friends along the way to teach me some basic techniques that I could do simply and make it beautiful. And what the people that I work with in fashion photography know is it just has to look good for a photo. Like their brains are trained like that versus like a seamstress or something like that. They know, okay, if you can't shoot it from the back, no problem. Like we might be shooting from one angle and it just has to look great. But the other reason is I do have people that hire me to do fashion shoots for them that are not models and maybe don't fit sample size couture clothing, which is like a size 02 in the US, right? And so they still deserve that experience. And so a lot of times we are draping things and then on top of it, layering it with jewelry and it will look like a beautiful dress. So yeah, it comes a lot from the wonderful people that I'm around having these skill sets and then saying, can you teach me this? And then if me finding it useful, I pass it on to other people.
Amazing. Now, obviously, you create all these workshops and all these packages that people can get involved with. But that takes you away from the photography. So how do you find the right balance between, producing the content for your education side and actually doing the photography and pitching for clients?
For sure, it is definitely a difficult balance. Don't get me wrong. Like there are times where I'm like, oh man, okay, I need to shift. But I have found that the other reason, one of the main ways that I find people hire me is because my images made it on Pinterest and social media, right? And they made it onto the creative boards. But sometimes it is also because those same people saw me on YouTube. they had another creative in the office that recommended me because they're into photography and they needed a photographer. And they said, you should check out this person because I took one of her classes and she's really good. And so I also consider it something that feeds into my commercial work because it does. It's proven so many times that somebody saw me online. Like the other day, I had a model, like this was like 2 days ago, a model sitting in my chair and he's like, I know you from YouTube. And I was like, you know me from YouTube? And he's like, I also am a hobbyist photographer. And so there's a lot of people that are attracted to the creative fields, even if they're not working as a photographer at that agency. The graphic designer, the art director, the art producer, the creative director, all of those people, a lot of them are still into photography and have actually found me through what I teach. So I think it's a beautiful synergy.
So smart marketing as well.
Totally works. And I don't think many other people have the ability to do that. So that's kind of a unique one for me. I get to be the expert that they want to hire the expert.
Fantastic. So now we come to the section called 6 from SheClicks. And I've got 10 questions from SheClicks members. And I'm going to ask you to answer 6 of them, please. If you could pick a number from 1 to 10.
Okay. 7.
7. Okay. Do you work with photo editing teams or do you edit everything yourself? And that question is from Carmen.
Carmen, that is an excellent question, and it is both. When I am outsourcing images, which is a good portion of the time, I have the retouchers doing skin cleanup, blemishes, uneven textures. But anything like contouring or color grading, giving the image that mood and the way that it is toned and processed, that's me. So I treat it as both of us working towards the end goal. And as a note, I also treat my retoucher as part of my creative team. I have 2 retouchers that I use most often. And so it's really helpful because most of the time they don't even need to ask what I want. They know what I want because they have retouched hundreds and thousands of images for me.
And I guess because you're working with them a lot of the time, they see your progression as well. So they know the way that you're moving. They're kind of going with you on that.
Totally.
Okay. So could I have another number from 1 to 10, please?
Number 2.
Number 2. Right. Okay. How do you manage models who won't pose the way you ask them to? Any tips would be appreciated. And that question's from Mary, who I think has struggled with some models not posing as she asked them to.
Mary, no matter how experienced you are and how prestigious the model agency is, I regularly get models that don't know how to do their job. Like it always shocks me. Because they'll be represented and it's a very prestigious agency and they're just kind of standing there. So a couple of tips that I try to coach from my subjects is I will try to get them to actually sway and move, because what happens is when someone's kind of standing there, they get all like rigid and they're kind of just standing at camera. So if I say, okay, I'd like your hand soft towards your chest, maybe on your clavicle, but I'll say, okay, now I'm going to have you sway your shoulders back and forth and drag your hand across your chest, across the clavicles. And what it will do is it will give me just a little bit more authentic motions in the body instead of them just being standing there like a statue. I think that's a good one. And then this one sounds obvious, has nothing to do with posing, but I do before any shoot when the models are getting their hair and makeup done. I try to have a conversation with them to get to know them as much as possible. So I had a model on set the other day that was seemed really grumpy. Her name was Nora. So I'm just telling Nora, if you're out there, it's true. You seemed really grumpy. So I came over to her and I tried to ask her a little bit about herself. And then I found out that she was from Istanbul. So I picked up and I talked about my favorite things there and I asked her for advice. And so then when on set, if she seems a little, tight, I'll go, oh, and by the way, I was just remembering this other thing. To get her mind off of being uncomfortable or not wanting to be there, I try to take her mind another direction. Okay, great. So now I'm thinking for this next pose, and it allows us to flow better. And then I will also give them vibe over body position. I'll say, okay, in this shot, we are going for strong. So what I want you to do is I want everything to be very angular and good posture, rather than just saying, can you put your hand on your hip and stand tall? Those sorts of things.
Oh yeah, I think that's really good advice. Just kind of giving them more idea of what you're aiming for. Okay, so that was 2 and 7. Could I have your third number, please?
Number 3.
Number 3. Okay. So you've touched on this, actually. What do you think about AI? Do you think that it poses a threat to real photographers long term? Or someone also said, is it a new revolution? So that's mainly by Bridget, that question.
All right. So Bridget, right now, I think that AI is inspiring and terrifying at the same levels. And I am using it in my business all the time to help me build mood boards, inspiration boards. Because a lot of times there is something that I want to show the client that I'm thinking, but I can't quite find the right image. It doesn't maybe quite exist. And so AI allows me to build that, and I can show that to my client as a reference. In the example that I gave earlier, right? We're going to the reconstructive surgery. AI is not a threat to that because the whole point is that they're showing real clients. They're showing real customers. And so they're not going to replace that because the idea is that they're showcasing real people. Real is the key word there. But I do think in a lot of commercial photography, it will be a threat because a lot of things went that way with CGI. Most car ads are not real. Most product ads are not real. And so I think those same things that fall into that category certainly are at risk. So I'm currently using it for ideation and for communication. And I think anything where the point is you're photographing reality or moments, a moment in a family's time, for example, a family portrait, it's the same way that someone would want a photograph of themselves versus a painting. Some people will want the painting, the creative representation, and then some people want to show that moment. So I think it is both.
I've not heard someone refer to that or drawn the analogy with painting before, but actually that's a really good one because painters have the opportunity to make something that isn't there, and that's essentially what AI is doing. So I think that's a really good way of explaining it. Thank you. All right, so can I have your fourth number, please?
9.
Number 9. How do you spark your creativity? That question's from Emma.
So Emma, this answer has many sub-answers to it, but I will try to be succinct. One of the things that really helps me is being around other creatives, not existing on my own, thinking that I have to come up with all of the ideas. So the fact that I work with hair and makeup or wardrobe, these people bring me inspiration. We're constantly sharing each other images online. Maybe we go to see a movie together. Maybe we're talking about something that we saw on Netflix that was at a really beautiful frame. It's having conversations with other creatives all the time. It keeps you fueled. That is an important one for me, which is why I have the benefit, the good habit or bad habit of dating photographers. You can decide which one that is. It's worked out for me both ways before, so I don't know. The next part of it was actually the hands-on workshop that I did this past weekend, which was called the Timeless Workshop. And the idea of that workshop is how to look at pieces of art from the past, analyze it, and figure out what pieces you want to take to reinterpret into your own work. I think it is very helpful when you have your own style because you're not going to look at a piece of artwork, be inspired, and just rip it off. Instead, you're going to see it through the lens of how you see the world and how you represent the world in your photography. So I do look at paintings and cinema, and I look at other photographers, but I tend to not look at the photographers that are super successful in the teaching world because all photographers are looking there, and then it starts to become really derivative. So I try to look to successful photographers maybe in the 50s, 60s, 70s and pull inspiration from them.
Are there any particular names that you pay attention to?
Oh, yeah, so many. So Lillian Bassman is one of my favorite photographers from like the 60s time period. She's absolutely incredible. If you see how she shot, you'll understand. Currently, there's a photographer that I love. There's 2 of them. The first one is Christian Schuler, who is a German, I believe, a German fashion photographer who creates these incredible fantasies. And the way he plays with light and color is always inspiring me. Then there is I believe she's Russian photographer. Her name is Elizaveta Porodina. It's very intense, but she's in the past maybe 2 or 3 years, she has exploded and she is just taking over the world with her photography. She's wonderful. And then one more that I love is a Spanish photographer whose name is Eugenio Recuenco. And I've always loved his work. I've had, when his first fine art book came out years ago, I bought it. And he did maybe 3 years ago, he finished a 365 project that was done over 6 years, where everything was shot in the confines of a room, one single room, 365 different ways.
That sounds very intense.
He is so talented.
I'll have to look into that. Okay, thank you for those names. Can I have your fifth number, please?
Okay, let's do number 5 since it's 5.
Number 5. Okay, so what is the modifier that you like to use the most often?
Okay, am I allowed to cheat a little bit?
Why not?
Okay, great. So the one that I use most often will sound like a sales pitch, so that's why I have to say it and then give you another one. The one that I use most often is the Westcott optical spot, which I designed. And I don't say that because it's a sales pitch. I actually designed it because a modifier like this existed. I used it nonstop, and then the company went out of business. It got discontinued. So I made my own version of this. And what it allows you to do is make little slices of light on the face or on the scene or the background. And if you look at my portfolio, if you look at my Instagram, you'll see it nonstop. But that is very specific and sounds salesy. So probably the one that I use most often after that would be a beauty dish. I use a beauty dish because I shoot a lot of beauty photography, and it gives you a lot of control with a little bit more pop than you get, a little bit more contrast than you get from a softbox.
I'd be disappointed if you weren't using the modifier that you designed, to be honest.
But that's good. I really do use it. I swear it wasn't meant to be a sales pitch. I used 3 at the same time yesterday.
Oh, wow. So you're getting 3 different patches of light.
Yeah.
Or stripes of light. Okay, so your last number then.
Okay, let's do number 8.
Number 8. Do you have any advice for anyone wanting to get into fashion photography?
I have 2 main categories of advice for people wanting to get into fashion photography. The first one we talked about earlier, which is finding your creative team and network. If you have beautiful images, but you don't have the connections, it does feel like screaming into the void because you're like, isn't my work good enough? But guess what? There's so many people with good work. And so a lot of those ins have to do with the people that make those introductions and that build you into the web of what exists in your city or community. So that's number 1. My next piece of advice is to have some sort of style to your work, some unique way that you represent the world, you interpret the world. And the reason that becomes important is because people see your work, they recognize it as your own, they know you're the expert in that style. And if a fashion brand or an ad agency or a company wants a certain aesthetic and your work represents that aesthetic, they hire you because you are the expert in that aesthetic. That doesn't mean you can't shoot other things. You definitely can. One of my clients is Pampers. Pampers, like the baby, the diapers. Like if you go and look at Pampers, the butt wipes and the packages, I shot all those images. But you don't see that anywhere because that's not the type of work that I'm trying to attract. Babies are fine, but that's a money job versus a joy job. And the reason your style becomes so important is it makes you memorable. So when you are sending out promos or someone's following you on Instagram, they kind of register you in their brains. If the work is all over the place, they will associate you to being many different photographers and not in one unique one. So when I mentioned Lillian Bassman, Elizaveta, Christian Schuler, Eugenia Roquenco, if you look at those works, as soon as you see a photo they've taken, you instantly know it's theirs. There's no one else that would have taken those photos. And so that becomes indispensable. And that's one of the reasons they are so successful and why I admire them so much.
I'll be looking at Pampers in a very different way when I go to the supermarket now.
Yes. And just a little aside, a fun note about that is I bet you guys have no idea what goes into production for Pampers. Because on set, there's a photographer, 2 assistants, and a digital tech. So it's somebody who's, backing up and managing the files. From there, there's the creative director of the shoot, and then there's a producer who helps make the shoot happen. Then there's usually 2 people from client side. Then you have an on-set nurse. Then you have what is called a baby wrangler, who is, their whole entire job is to get the baby to look and to give the pose that they want. Because when you are shooting Pampers, based on the age, they want you to show in the poses different body movements. Okay, they can sit on their knees. They can push themselves up. They can stand because it's showing development. So the baby wrangler. Then you also have the baby stylist who is dressing them or making sure the diaper looks good. Then you have somebody who's doing the hair and makeup, and it's they can't really put too much makeup, but it'd be like making sure the skin has lotion on it, fixing the hair in the shot. And then there's catering. And then it is so much more than people would think for just a picture of a baby in a diaper.
Yeah, it must be a pretty big room.
Oh yeah, you rent huge rental studios. And the other reason I'll do it too is for every single baby, every single diaper size, they have multiple babies in case one of the babies wasn't doing well that day, wasn't really going to be cooperating, but so that they're not all in the same space. If one cries and the other ones cry, you have to rent a separate studio just as a holding area so that they can nap if they need to nap, that they can eat if they need to eat. It's so intense. I had no idea until I got hired for those jobs.
Well, I tell you what, I love the idea of somebody having baby wrangler on their CV or their LinkedIn profile. I'm gonna see if I can find someone on LinkedIn who's a baby wrangler.
Yep, and they get paid between $1,500 and $2,000 a day. So it's a good gig if you can get it.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. But there's one more that I need to ask you, which is, do you have any plans to come to the UK to run any workshops over here?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Someday. I think next year. Next year, I am attending a conference in June, but I'm waiting to make sure that they've announced everything. Okay. So I'll be over and presenting in June. And then I hope to do some kind of big fashion workshop thing someday at a castle of some sort. You guys seem to collect those, so why not take advantage of it?
We have a few.
Yeah, we have none.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Right, well, I'll keep my eye open for dates.
Okay, great.
Lindsay, it's been absolutely wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. Thank you.
All right, I will see you on your side of the ocean.
I look forward to that. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. You'll find links to Lindsay's website and social media channels in the show notes. I'll be back with another episode soon, so please subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform and tell all your friends and followers about it. You'll also find SheClicks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube if you search for SheClicksNet. So until next time, enjoy your photography.